Hello, Big Italy 42 here with you once again. Today I'm going to be talking about the lineup that I entered in last Friday's $25 FanDuel Grand Slam as part of the Fantasy Pros Expert Challenge that won me $20,000. And I'm going to give you the rundown, my thought process, my strategy behind it, why I picked each player in each spot, and I'm going to go right down the line, and then I'm going to talk about how each one produced. So, without further ado, starting off was starting pitcher. And I went with Tim Lincecum here, who's 9.2% owned. Obviously, pitchers in Petco Park is an ideal strategy. Generally a lower total and, a huge ballpark. So 6 to 6.5 run total, depending where you looked. I believe the last book I looked at was a 6-run total. He against Brandon Morrow. And that right there tells you Vegas not expecting a lot of runs. You get the pitchers on either side. Lincecum was a fairly cheap price tag. And I knew that he'd be low owned, especially because there was 15 games on the slate, so 30 teams playing. I mean, it tells you right there, there's 60 pitchers on the night. So obviously, no one pitcher is going to be high owned. Like I said, 9.2% for Tim Lincecum. He keeps the ball in the park. He does pretty well keeping the ball on the ground. Not the strikeout pitcher that he once was, but I liked his price tag in this matchup to keep. Hopefully, I was hoping for a quality start, a win, maybe 6 to 7 strikeouts. Ended up working out well. He threw 96 pitches, got me 5 strikeouts and 7 shutout innings, and he exited the game with a 0-0 tie. So, got me 12 points. I can't be too mad at that at his price tag, and I was completely happy, especially because he was my last player to go. Most of the other players around me, near the top 10, didn't have any pitchers. One player around me had another pitcher, and that didn't work out too well for him. Tawan Walker, it was basically a dead heat between he and I. I had Lincecum, he had Walker. Walker imploded. Got absolutely annihilated, kind of knocking him out of contention. And that was that with Tim Lincecum. Next up is catcher. I went with Devin Mesoraco, who's just 2.6% owned. I know what you're thinking. You're a Reds fan. You went with Devin Mesoraco for that reason alone. Not the case. Last year, he hit 21 home runs against right-handed pitching, a 272 ISO, which is a ton of power, especially for a catcher. Not a lot of catchers with that type of power. Hitting in Great American Ballpark where it's one of the highest run totals, one of the better hitters parks in the league. In fact, depending on where you look, it's right around 4th or 5th in runs produced. A home run nearly every game. There was a long streak where there was at least 1 home run each game. And John Lackey last year allowed 17 home runs in just 97 innings pitched on the road, compared to 7 and 101 at home. So that right there tells me he struggled on the road, and he would struggle even more on the road at Great American Ballpark, giving a lot of home runs. So I wanted to get some exposure to that, one of his biggest weaknesses. Unfortunately, Mesoraco kind of was a bust. He went 0 for 4, went negative 1 point. As you get minus 1/4 of a point for each out on FanDuel. And, Devin Mesoraco, my biggest bust there at -1. Moving on to first base, where my top player came, and this is another Cincinnati Reds player, Joey Votto, which is 6.7% owned. And I was going back and forth all day between he and David Ortiz. David Ortiz was a great play. A lot of people on him in a great matchup. But in a big tournament, especially this one, almost 9,000 people, you want to be able to differentiate yourself from the crowd. And Joey Votto was extremely underpriced at just $3,600. Obviously, I wasn't expecting 2 home runs from him, but I did like his matchup against Lackey, who doesn't really have much of a split between lefties and righties. He allowed last year a 316 WOBA to lefties and 11 home runs, compared to 327 WOBA and 13 home runs to righties. So not terrible against either, but below average against lefties and righties. And Votto hit a home run in each of his first 2 at-bats. Then later on, he walked, stole second, kind of the clincher there for me as far as my batting order. 16.75 points for Joey Votto. Next up, second base, and this was my second highest scorer, D. Gordon. And this is going to kind of fit in. You'll notice my strategy was to get a lot of a mixture between speed and power. So obviously, in power, I was thinking Mesoraco, Votto to a certain extent, and D. Gordon obviously goes along with the speed. So at 13.9% there, he was at $3,800, and his on-base percentage has never been high throughout his time in the majors, only a few years at this point, but he does steal a lot of bases, and he was going against rookie Chris Geltz. And he only pitched 2 innings. Then Erasmo Ramirez came in and pitched 2 innings, but D. Gordon had a monster game. 3 for 5, a double, 4 runs scored, 2 stolen bases. He scored a run in the 8th inning from Stanton, who I'll get to in a few minutes. Scored a run from Yelich in the 10th inning. I didn't have Yelich, but I got each of the last 2 runs, including the game-winning run in the 10th inning from D. Gordon. I ended up winning this tournament by half a point. So each one of those at-bats, each one of those runs was huge for me that night. Next up, shortstop. Johnny Peralta was a popular play at 25.1%, by far my highest owned player, and rightfully so. I mean, a lot of people saw what I did. He was priced at just $2,800 and facing off against Jason Marquis, who hadn't pitched in the major league since 2013. And Peralta has a solid ISO, isolated power, 172 against righties last year. And at that price tag, he just made sense. Hitters park, decent amount of power against a pitcher we didn't really know what to expect from because he hadn't pitched in a major league game in over a year. So I like that matchup with him. He didn't have a huge night, but 2 for 4, a single, a double, and an RBI. Got me 3.5 points. More than enough right there for Johnny Peralta to pay off that cheap price tag. Next up, third base. And this one, for those of you who follow MLB closely, you know David Wright, always been a lefty masher. Impressive numbers throughout his career. 233 ISO, 425 weighted on base average. So he's a guy that I love to target against lefties, and especially Friday night, he was at just $3,300 on FanDuel, and I loved his price tag. He hit a 2-run homer in the 4th inning, which got me into the top 10, and I stayed in there the rest of the night and as I moved up towards the top, starting with that home run right there. And he was an instant inclusion in my lineup as soon as I saw Eric Stoltz on the mound on the other side. A bad pitcher, allowed 20 home runs to righties last year, and that was with him pitching half his starts in Petco. So he's a pretty bad pitcher, a guy I really like to pick on. And then David Wright even managed two more singles and a stolen base. So I've got a stolen base out of Votto, who doesn't steal bases, a stolen base out of David Wright, who doesn't steal a lot of bases. So a lot of things went in my favor also as well on Friday. Next up, the outfield. And if you know me, you've heard me talk last year on podcasts, this year on podcasts, you'll know that I love Kevin Kiermaier, one of my favorite young players in the game. Unfortunately, last year, and even a few times this year already, been slotted 8th in the order, 9th in the order, down order. Really hard to play someone that low in the order. And I also like to pick on Dan Herron. I think Dan Herron is at the tail end of his career, and while he wasn't bad Friday night, he did make one mistake, and that was letting Kevin Kiermaier hit a home run off of him, also in the 4th inning, much like David Wright's home run. And I loved his price tag at $2,800, batting leadoff against a guy I like to pick on. And while the strategy in general against Herron that night was not great, but I only had one piece of exposure, and that was Kevin Kiermaier to him. So he paid off with the home run, and he ended up with 9.5 points. So it was very nice payoff there for me with Kevin Kiermaier under $3,000. Next up, a bust. Bryce Harper. He was sitting at $4,300, 21.3% owned, so fairly high owned, but you had to like the matchup with him right there. Jerome Williams allowed a 335 career WOBA to lefties. I like to target him all the time in daily fantasy. And gave up a leadoff home run to Michael Taylor and then proceeded to pitch 6 innings with no more runs allowed, just 4 hits. Obviously, Harper didn't have much of a day, didn't do anything after that either. One single, went 1 for 4, and ended up with 0.25 fantasy points for me. So the 215 career ISO for Harper was down a little bit last year, but that's his career number, and I like that amount of power against Jerome Williams, who doesn't give up a ton of home runs, but I just like the situation for him. Didn't end up paying off, but like I said, the rest of the lineup came together in such a way that Bryce Harper didn't kill me. Very close, but Bryce Harper, Devin Mesoraco did not kill me. And last up, Giancarlo Stanton. Once again against rookie Chris Geltz, who, like I said, only ended up pitching 2 innings. And Geltz actually got Stanton out the first time. He grounded out. And after that, Stanton had himself a very nice game against Erasmo Ramirez and the rest of the Rays bullpen. 2-run double in the 4th, and RBI in the 8th, scoring D. Gordon, like I mentioned earlier, which was huge for me. I got a hit, an RBI, a run scored. That was monstrous. Ended up with 10.75 fantasy points, Giancarlo Stanton. Perfect amount of power. Great in that lineup. I liked the matchup, obviously. I had myself multiple pieces of that puzzle there for the Marlins. And without hitting a home run, he paid off in a big way for me. So my final score was 75 points. Held off Lefevre 21 by just a half a point. Hell of a showing by him as well. I guess I should say him or her. I'm not sure entirely about that. But by just a half a point, real tumultuous end. There were times where Chase Headley came up, and I was a hit away from being passed. I had David Ortiz and Mookie Betts on my tail. One of them had hit a home run in that 19th inning game. I could have sunk as low as 4th. And basically, what I'm trying to tell you here is that was my big night. I had one single entry, and I know a lot of new players get discouraged with a lot of players having multi-entries in these tournaments. I think that It makes it hard to level the playing ground, makes it hard to compete with guys who have 10, 20, 50 entries in these big tournaments. But I'm here to tell you firsthand, you can win these tournaments with just one lineup, and you don't have to be perfect. I had two guys I completely whiffed on. My pitcher didn't get a win, still paid off, took home a nice $20,000 payday. So this is telling you, obviously, this isn't the only strategy that works. It's just one that I like to implement. Obviously, stacks work, power, speed, however you like to go. Targeting all guys in the top half of the order is always pretty key. And making sure that you target pitchers in great spots in pitchers' ballparks, low Vegas totals. But either way, no matter what your strategy may be, hopefully this helped you out a little bit, gave you a little bit of insight into where my head was at before, during, and after that great tournament. So I appreciate you checking this out and listening here. If you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter at BigItaly42. And we have a lot of great content about MLB with all of our experts at dailyfantasycafe.com. And I will see you guys again next time.